That cold night under a dark overpass, I watched my daughter dressed in rags, sharing a small dinner roll with a child. The second she saw me, she rushed over sobbing. Dad's stepmother told me you died overseas. I held your death certificate. And baom, menor, the stars. My chest tightened under this brutal truth. The person I trusted most had quietly stripped my daughter of everything. I swear I will make the betrayer pay for every single tear. Welcome to Revenge, Dad. I'm incredibly grateful you're here. To help us connect, please comment below with your city or country. Also note that this story features fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or locations is coincidental, but the core message remains highly valuable for you. The pilot announced our descent into Dallas at 9:47 in the evening, and I pressed my palm flat against the cold oval window and looked down at the city I had not seen in 10 years. From 30,000 feet, Dallas looked exactly the way I remembered it. The grid of light stretching south toward the horizon, the dark ribbon of the Trinity River cutting through the glow, the cluster of downtown towers burning white and gold against the October sky. It looked like home. It looked like everything I had been holding in my chest for a decade. I told myself Clara would be standing at the door when I got there. I had replayed that moment 10,000 times on oil rigs and in bare-walled apartments across 3 different countries. Her face when she opened the door, the way she would grab my arm before I could even put my bag down. My grandson Leo, whom I had only ever seen in photos running in from the kitchen, to finally meet the grandfather he'd only heard stories about. I had spent 10 years earning that moment. I was 20 minutes from having it. I was wrong about almost everything that night. The taxi driver was a young man named Derek, who had one of those pine tree air fresheners hanging from the rearview mirror and a country station playing low on the radio. He glanced at me in the mirror as we merged onto the highway. "First time back in a while?" he asked. 10 years, I said. He let out a low whistle. "That's a long stretch. You got family here?" Leo, at 2 years old, sitting in a plastic red wagon, in what I now knew was the backyard of the house on Birchwood Lane. Last time I saw him, he looked like this. Derek glanced at the photo and smiled. "He's going to lose his mind when he sees you." "That's the plan," I said. But when we turned onto Birchwood Lane and Derek slowed to the address I had given him, the lights in the house were on. That part was right. What was wrong was the man who answered the door. He was maybe 40 heavy-set, wearing a Dallas Cowboys jersey holding a half-eaten sandwich. He looked at me with the polite confusion of someone who had never seen me before in his life. "Can I help you?" he said. "This is my daughter's house," I said. "Clara Calloway. I'm her father." The man's expression shifted into something careful. "Sir, I've been renting this property for 14 months. I don't know anyone by that name." The sandwich. He was still holding the sandwich. I stared at it for a moment because my brain had stopped processing words and was working only on small, irrelevant details. The sandwich, the Cowboys jersey, the 14 months. "Who is your landlord?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. He told me the name of a property management company. I wrote it down on the back of my boarding pass with hands that had begun to shake in a way I couldn't stop. I thanked him. I walked back to the taxi. I sat down, and Derek looked at me in the rearview mirror and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. "Drive," I said. "Just drive." We went slowly through the neighborhood. I looked at every porch, every driveway, every face under every streetlight, as if Clara might simply be standing somewhere nearby, waiting. My phone showed no missed calls, no texts. I dialed her number and got a recorded message saying the number was no longer in service. It was Derek who spotted them first. We were stopped at a red light beneath an overpass on Commerce Street, the concrete overhead stained dark from years of rain, when he said quietly, "Sir, there are people under there." I looked. There was a woman sitting on flattened cardboard against the concrete support pillar. She was wearing a coat 2 sizes too large, faded green, the kind you find at Goodwill when you are choosing function over everything else. Beside her sat a boy with a backpack across his knees, dark-haired, very still, watching her hands. She was tearing something in half, a dinner roll, the kind handed out at food pantries, soft and pale and gone in 2 bites. She gave the boy the larger half without looking up. "Pull over," I said. "Sir, pull over right now." The words came out of me like something breaking. "Right here, now." Derek cut across 2 lanes. A horn blared behind us. I did not care. I was out of the car before it fully stopped, my carry-on bag hitting the sidewalk, my legs moving without my permission, pulled forward by a knowledge I did not yet have language for, but my body already understood completely. The woman heard the car door and pulled her shoulders inward, making herself smaller against the pillar. The boy looked up immediately, dark eyes, quick and watchful, the eyes of a child who has learned to read situations before they develop. "Clara," I said. The boy went rigid. The woman raised her head. My wife Eleanor had been gone for 14 years. And here was Clara, a grown woman now, 38 years old. Cheekbones sharper than I remembered, hair pulled back with a rubber band, a small tear near the collar of her sweater. But it was her face, every line of it. The face I had held in a hospital room 38 years ago, when she weighed 7 pounds and I was 29 years old and terrified and more in love than I had known a person could be. She stared at me, her lips parted. The dinner roll dropped from her hand. "That's not possible," she whispered. They told me you were dead." The words hit me somewhere below the sternum, and my legs stopped working correctly. I grabbed the chain-link fence beside me and held on. "Clara." My voice cracked down the middle. "It's me. I'm real. I'm standing right here." She scrambled to her feet so fast she nearly knocked the cardboard sideways. The boy, Leo, my grandson 10 years old, a stranger to me, caught her arm and steadied her with the automatic reflex of a child who had been doing this for a very long time. "Dad," the word came out of her like something torn. "Dad, I held the paper. I held your death certificate in my hands. I went to the service. She couldn't finish. Her whole body was shaking. Tears were running freely down her face, and she pressed both hands over her mouth as if that could stop what was happening to her. I crossed the distance between us in 4 steps and put my arms around my daughter for the first time in 10 years. She went completely rigid for 1 second, the second it takes a person's body to confirm what their mind cannot accept, and then she collapsed against my chest, sobbing in a way I had not heard from her since she was a small girl who had fallen off her bicycle and didn't want to cry but couldn't help it. Leo stood back watching us both. His face was very controlled for a 10-year-old. He was measuring the situation the way children do when they have learned that adults cannot always be trusted to hold things together. I looked at him over Clara's shoulder. "You must be Leo," I said. He studied me for a long moment. "She told us you were dead," he said. His voice was quiet and very serious. "She showed Mom the paper." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." He looked at me for 3 more seconds. Then he stepped forward and wrapped both arms around my waist and held on, and I held them both there on the sidewalk under that overpass, while the Dallas traffic rolled past behind us, and I tried to understand what I was standing inside of. It was not the homecoming I had imagined, but there was a question already forming at the back of my mind, pressing through everything else, quiet and insistent and impossible to ignore. If Clara never received my money, where had all of it gone? Derek was still parked at the curb when I walked back to the taxi with Clara on one side and Leo on the other. The boy had not let go of his backpack. He carried it the way kids carry things, when the bag is the only possession they are certain belongs to them. Derek looked at Clara. He looked at Leo. He looked at me. He didn't ask a single question. He just said, "There's a shelter on Harwood Street, about 6 blocks north. They take families." I had never been so grateful for a stranger's decency in my life. The Harwood Women and Family Shelter occupied a converted church hall, red brick exterior, narrow windows, a hand-painted sign above the door in dark blue letters that someone had touched up recently enough that the paint still looked deliberate. Inside the hallway smelled like industrial laundry detergent and the faint ghost of a hot dinner served hours ago. The floors were worn smooth by years of foot traffic. Along the walls, children's drawings hung in cheap frames, crayon suns and lopsided houses and figures holding hands, the kind of art that gets made when a child needs somewhere safe to put what they are feeling. A woman came out of the front office before we had taken 3 steps inside. She was in her early 60s, broad-shouldered, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she moved with the unhurried calm of someone who had spent decades sitting with people in the worst moments of their lives. She looked at Clara first, the specific look of someone checking on a person they already know, and then her eyes moved to me with careful, quiet assessment. "Margaret," Clara said, her voice still ragged from crying. "This is my father." Margaret Holt extended her hand. Her grip was firm and dry. Mr. Calloway, she said. She said my name the way people say names when they already know the story attached to them. Take all the time you need. Leo had spotted a common room down the hall where two other kids were watching television. He glanced at Clara, asking permission without words. She gave him a small nod, and he disappeared around the corner, but not before he looked back at me, once checking that I was still there. I understood that look with everything in me. It was the look of a child who had learned that people vanish. Margaret brought us to a small meeting room, folding table 4 plastic chairs, a window that looked out onto a narrow strip of parking lot. She set 2 paper cups of water on the table without being asked and pulled the door closed behind her. Clara sat down across from me and wrapped both hands around her cup. Her knuckles were white. She had stopped crying, but her eyes were still swollen, and there was a particular kind of exhaustion in her face that had nothing to do with the hour. It was the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to put it down. "Tell me about the death certificate," I said. Clara's jaw tightened. She pressed her palms flat on the table. "Evelyn called me on a Tuesday morning," she said. "About 4 years ago. She was crying, really crying, Dad, the kind you can't fake, or at least I thought you couldn't. She said you had a heart attack in Singapore, that it happened overnight, that by the time anyone reached you it was already over." She stopped, swallowed. "She said she was handling all the arrangements overseas, that there was nothing I needed to do except grieve. And the certificate, she mailed it 3 days later. It had your full name, your date of birth, the location, a cause of death, official-looking seals, from what appeared to be a Singapore government office." Her voice went flat in the way voices go flat when a person has rehearsed a painful thing so many times it has worn smooth. "I held it in my hands for an hour, Dad. I sat on the kitchen floor and held it. It looked real. It felt real. I had no reason in the world to think it was anything else." My chest was burning. I kept my hands under the table so she wouldn't see them shaking. "What about calling the overseas office directly?" I asked. "My work contacts—" "Evelyn told me your overseas contract had been terminated the month before." Clara's eyes filled again, but she blinked hard, refusing to let go. "She said the company had already closed your files. Your email bounced back automated messages. Your cell number was disconnected. Every door I tried to push open, she had already closed it. She thought of everything, Dad. Every single exit. She shut them all before she made that call." The silence between us was not empty. It was full of 4 years of her grief and 10 years of my absence and all the space where the truth should have been. "I'm sorry," I said. The words felt like handing someone a bandage when what they needed was surgery. "Clara, I am so—" "Don't." She shook her head. "Not yet. There's something I need to show you first." She stood and crossed to the corner of the room, where a cardboard box sat on the floor, old, the corners soft with handling, the flaps held together with a thick rubber band. She lifted it carefully, the way you lift something that matters more than it weighs, and set it on the table between us. "Open it," she said. Inside the box were letters. Dozens of them, each one folded and sealed, each one stamped and addressed in Clara's handwriting, that looping, heavy-handed cursive she had developed in middle school and never changed. But every stamp had been peeled back slightly and pressed down again, and none of the envelopes had been opened from the other end. "You wrote these to me," I said. My throat had closed to the width of a straw. "After Evelyn told me you were gone, I didn't know what to do with what I was feeling." Clara sat back down. Her chin was trembling now, but her voice stayed level through sheer force of will. "I couldn't talk to anyone. Thomas didn't want to hear it. His mother acted like grief had an expiration date, so I started writing to you. I wrote one every few weeks, sometimes more." She pressed her lips together hard. "I addressed them, I stamped them, I put them in the mailbox on the corner of Vine Street. They always came back. I thought it was because there was no one to receive them anymore." "She intercepted them," I said. It was not a question. "I figured that out today. She took them from the mailbox before the carrier ever picked them up. But back then," Clara's voice finally broke just at the edge, just for a second. "Back then I just thought the post office was returning them because the address was dead, the same way you were." I reached into the box and took out a letter at random. The postmark date showed 3 years ago. I unfolded it with hands that were not steady and did not pretend to be. "Dad," it began. "Leo asked me today why we don't have any photos of you in the apartment. I told him the movers lost the box. I didn't know what else to say. I sold Mom's sapphire bracelet this morning to cover the electric bill. I don't understand why I keep owing money I don't remember borrowing. I miss you every single day. I'm so tired, Dad. I'm so tired. Love, Clara." I folded the letter back along its creases. My eyes were burning so fiercely I had to press 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and hold them there. "I was in a rented apartment in Singapore when you wrote this," I said. My voice came out rough and uneven, like a road that had been broken up by frost and never properly repaired. "I was eating a hot meal and watching the news and wiring money home every single month because I believed you were fine. I believed you were safe. I believed—" "I know." Clara reached across the table and covered my hands with hers. Her fingers were ice cold. "I know that now." We sat like that for a long moment, her cold hands over my shaking ones. 47 letters in a cardboard box between us. Then I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, at the woman she had become inside of everything that had been done to her, and I said the only thing that mattered at that particular moment in that particular room. "You are never sleeping in this shelter again after tonight," I said. "I promise you that." She looked at me across the table, her jaw set in that stubborn angle she had inherited directly from Eleanor. And despite everything, despite the cardboard box and the cold hands and the 4 years of returned letters, she almost smiled. But the question was still there. It had not gone anywhere. It was sitting in the back of my mind like a stone at the bottom of a river, heavy and permanent and impossible to ignore. 47 letters. But what about the money? I checked Clara and Leo into the room next to mine before midnight. 2 queen beds, a bathroom with a door that locked, curtains that closed all the way. Leo ran his hand along the edge of the mattress, the way you test something you are not sure is real. Clara stood in the middle of the room and looked around with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not relief exactly, but the fragile, careful look of a person who had forgotten what normal felt like and was not entirely sure she was allowed to have it back. "Get some sleep," I told her. "Dad, we need to talk about—" "Tomorrow," I said. "Tonight you sleep in a real bed, both of you." She nodded. Her chin was still trembling slightly. I stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me, and I stood there for a moment, with my hand still on the door handle, listening until I heard the lock click from the inside. Then I went to my room, sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and started pulling at the thread. The money. For 10 years, I had wired funds home on the 15th of every month without fail. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, medical expenses, a cushion for emergencies. The transfers always cleared. Evelyn sent occasional updates, brief, warm, exactly detailed enough to be convincing. Clara's doing well. Leo started 2nd grade. The water heater needed replacing, took care of it. I believed every word because I had built my entire life overseas, on the assumption that the people you trust will behave like people who deserve trust. I logged into my overseas banking portal and pulled up 10 years of transaction history. The transfers were all there, clean, consistent, 1 per month, always on the 15th, always the same receiving account. I clicked on the account number. I had never examined it closely before. Why would I? The money left my account on schedule, and that was the end of my involvement. But now I looked. The account was registered under the name Clara Calloway. That part appeared correct. But the email address listed for account notifications was one I had never seen, not Clara's personal address, not any address I recognized. And the phone number attached for 2-factor authentication had a Houston area code that I had never dialed in my life. My stomach dropped the way it drops when an elevator cable goes slack. I picked up my phone and called the Houston number. It rang 4 times and rolled to a generic voicemail. No name, no greeting, just a long beep. I hung up. I went back to the transaction page and added up every transfer I had made over 10 years. My hand went completely still on the mouse. $1,240,000. I said the number out loud in the empty hotel room, quietly. The way you repeat something when the first time doesn't take, when your brain simply refuses to absorb it, and you have to try again with your own voice to make it real. $1.2 million. Wired faithfully every 15th of every month for 10 years, into an account that carried my daughter's name, but used contact information. She had never seen a phone number. She had never held an email address that had never belonged to her. She set it up before I left. I said to no one. My voice sounded strange to me. Flat and hollow and very, very calm. The particular calm that lives on the other side of something enormous after the shock has passed through you and left everything rearranged. She built the account before I ever got on the plane. I sat completely still for 60 seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called Raymond Sterling. Raymond had been my lawyer and one of my closest friends for 30 years. We had met at a business conference in Fort Worth in 1995, argued about contract law over bad hotel coffee, and had been arguing productively ever since. He was 65 years old, semi-retired, and sharper than men half his age. He answered on the second ring, despite the fact that it was nearly 11:30 at night. "Arthur." His voice was alert immediately, the voice of a man whose instincts had been sharpened by 3 decades of receiving bad news at inconvenient hours. "Where are you?" "Dallas," I said. "I came back early. Raymond, I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening." I told him everything. Clara under the overpass, the shelter, the death certificate, the 47 letters, and then the account number, the unfamiliar email, the Houston phone number, and the total that was still glowing on my laptop screen in the dark hotel room. Raymond did not interrupt once. He listened the way good lawyers listen, completely, with every part of his attention, locked onto every word, building the structure of it in real time. When I finished, there was a brief pause. "Read me the account number," he said. I read it. "And the email address on the account." I read that too. I heard him writing, "Arthur." His voice had shifted into a register I recognized from 30 years of friendship, calm, precise, carrying the specific weight of a man who has just understood that something is very serious. "Do not touch anything in that account. Do not transfer. Do not withdraw. Do not move a single dollar. Do not call Evelyn tonight. Do not contact the bank directly. Raymond, I mean it. Not one move until I've looked at this." A pause. "Come to my office tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. Bring every piece of documentation you have, account statements, transfer records, everything you can pull tonight." "What do you think happened?" I asked, though part of me already knew. Part of me had known from the moment I saw that Houston area code. "I think," Raymond said carefully, "that someone opened a fraudulent account in your daughter's name, used false contact information to redirect 10 years of wire transfers into it, and did it well enough that neither you nor your bank ever flagged the discrepancy." He let that sit for a moment. "That is wire fraud under federal law, Arthur. If the person who did this is who I think it is, we are not talking about a family disagreement. We are talking about a federal criminal case. Wire fraud. The term has a specific legal meaning. In the United States, it refers to any scheme to defraud another person using electronic communications, including bank transfers. Under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1343, a single count of wire fraud carries up to 20 years in federal prison. Each individual transfer constitutes a separate count. 10 years, 120 monthly transfers. "Get some sleep if you can," Raymond said. "I'll see you at 7. I hung up. I closed the laptop. The room went dark except for the light under the bathroom door. I sat at the desk with my hands flat on the surface in front of me and looked at nothing. 10 years. Every transfer. Every 15th of the month, like a machine, like a man who trusted completely and verified nothing. $1.2 million flowing into a ghost account, while my daughter wrote letters to a dead man and fed my grandson charity bread under an overpass on Commerce Street. I had never felt more awake in my life, and I had never felt more sick. I did not sleep. I lay on the hotel bed in my clothes and stared at the ceiling while the numbers kept rearranging themselves in my head. 1.2 million, 120 transfers, 10 years every 15th of the month, until the sky outside the window went from black to gray to the pale, washed-out blue of a Dallas morning that had no idea what it was waking up into. At 6:15, I was already in the elevator. Raymond Sterling's office occupied the 14th floor of a building on Commerce Street that had been standing since the early 1980s, solid, slightly old-fashioned, the kind of place where the carpet had been replaced twice, but the oak furniture never had. Raymond had worked out of the same set of rooms for over 2 decades. Walking in felt the way it always had, like stepping into the office of a man who had seen enough of the world to stop being rattled by most of it. He was already at his desk when I arrived. 2 mugs of coffee sat on the table, black, no sugar, the way we had both been drinking it since we met in Fort Worth 30 years ago. He looked up when I walked in, and his eyes moved over me the way a doctor's eyes move, assessing without commenting. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No. Sit down." He pushed one of the mugs toward me. Before you react to anything, I want to tell you what I found. Then you can do whatever you need to do. I sat down and wrapped both hands around the mug. The heat of it burned my palms. I did not care. Raymond opened a folder on his desk and turned it so I could read it right side up. Inside were printed pages, transaction records, bank statements. A document I didn't immediately recognize. After we spoke last night, Raymond said, I called Marcus Webb. He's a private investigator I've worked with for 12 years. Former Dallas PD detective, meticulous, discreet. I asked him to start with one question. Were there any financial connections between Evelyn and the Miller family? I leaned forward. The Millers were Clara's former in-laws, Thomas's family. I had never trusted Beatrice Miller. There was a coldness in that woman that she dressed up as principal, but I had always attributed Clara's misery in that marriage to the ordinary cruelty of a difficult family. I had never thought to ask who was funding them. What did Marcus find? I asked. Raymond tapped the first page. Over the past 6 years, Evelyn made a series of wire transfers to a personal account held by Beatrice Miller, 41 separate transactions. He slid the page toward me. Never more than $9,000 at a time, always spaced several weeks apart. I looked at the column of numbers. My eyes moved to the total at the bottom. $83,000, I said. 83,420. Raymond confirmed. He sat back in his chair. The amounts were kept deliberately below $10,000 per transaction. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, American financial institutions are legally required to file a currency transaction report for any cash transaction exceeding $10,000. By keeping each transfer just under that threshold, Evelyn avoided triggering an automatic report. That practice has its own name under federal law structuring. It's a criminal offense under Title 31 of the United States Code, Section 5324, separate from the wire fraud charges. I stared at the page. 41 transactions. $83,000 moved in careful, calculated increments, specifically designed to stay invisible. But Marcus didn't stop there, Raymond continued. He pulled Beatrice Miller's corresponding bank records. Those transfers don't match any regular expense pattern. The money came in, and within 2 to 3 weeks it went straight back out. Rental payments on a vacation property in Galveston, a vehicle purchase, renovations on the Miller house in Garland. My fingers tightened around the mug until my knuckles ached. She paid them, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended, rough at the bottom, like gravel dragged across wet concrete. Evelyn paid the Miller family to go after Clara. That is what the financial pattern suggests, Raymond said carefully. We cannot prove intent from transfers alone, not yet. But combined with everything else you told me last night, the picture is becoming very clear. He folded his hands on the desk. Arthur, the Millers were not acting on their own instincts. Someone was funding their behavior, giving Beatrice Miller financial relief in exchange for cooperation, pressuring the marriage, isolating Clara, cutting off her support systems. He paused. I had known Raymond long enough to hear the anger underneath his professional evenness. It was the anger of a man who kept it controlled, because controlled anger was more useful than the other kind. Evelyn didn't do this alone, he said. She built a structure around your daughter, and she paid people to hold it in place. I stood up. My legs needed to move, because sitting still while absorbing that felt physically impossible. I walked to the window and looked out at Commerce Street 14 floors below, morning traffic building, a coffee cart opening on the corner, ordinary Tuesday Dallas, going about its ordinary business as if none of this was happening. Clara had told me last night that debt collectors had been calling for 3 years. Letters from lenders she had never heard of, accounts she had never opened. And while she was scrambling to understand what was happening to her finances, Beatrice Miller was sitting on $83,000 that Evelyn had paid her to make sure no one helped Clara figure it out. What do we do? I asked. My jaw was set so hard my back teeth hurt. We keep building, Raymond said. The financial records Marcus pulled are a start, but there is something else I want to look at today. He picked up a second folder from the stack on his desk. The house on Birchwood Lane. I turned back from the window. What about it? Raymond looked at me with the steady, careful eyes of a man who is about to say something that will hurt and has decided that honesty is the only thing worth offering. Arthur, he said, when did you last speak directly to anyone at the property, not through Evelyn, but directly yourself? The question hit me like cold water. I never did, I said slowly. Evelyn handled all of it. She managed the communication. She gave me updates. I felt something cold beginning to spread through my chest, reaching outward from the center, like frost moving across glass. Raymond, what did Marcus find? Raymond lifted his hand from the second folder and slid it across the desk toward me. I looked down at the document inside. My eyes moved straight to the line that listed the current owner of record. The name there was not Clara's. My legs went unsteady beneath me, and I reached for the edge of the desk. That house was never foreclosed on, Raymond said quietly. It was transferred, and we need to find out exactly how and exactly when before we do anything else. Raymond drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched Dallas scroll past the window without really seeing any of it. I kept thinking about the morning I handed Clara the keys to that house. She had been 24 years old, standing in the driveway on Birchwood Lane in a yellow jacket Eleanor had bought her the previous Christmas, and she had looked at the keys in her palm like she was afraid to close her fingers around them in case they disappeared. I told her the house was paid in full. No mortgage, no loan, no conditions attached. I wanted her to have one thing in this world that was entirely hers. One thing that no circumstance and no person could reach in and take away from her. I had been naive in a way that still made my chest ache. The Dallas County Property Records Office was a government building near the courthouse beige walls, fluorescent lighting the particular smell of paper that has been filed and retrieved and filed again for decades. A clerk led us into a research room and pulled the physical file for the property on Birchwood Lane. Raymond spread the documents across the table. We went through them together, the original deed from when I purchased the property 14 years ago, the title, insurance, the tax records, all of it clean, all of it bearing my name and Clara's name exactly as it should. Then Raymond slid the next page in front of me. "This is the transfer document," he said. His voice had gone into that controlled register, the one that meant he was managing something tightly. "Filed 4 years and 9 months ago." I looked at it. It was a warranty deed, the standard legal form used in Texas property transfers, and it listed a grantor, a grantee, and the terms of the transfer. In Texas, a warranty deed is the most common instrument for conveying real property. It guarantees that the seller holds clear title and has the legal authority to transfer ownership. The grantor line read, "Robert Arthur Calloway by power of attorney." The grantee line read, "Evelyn Marie Calloway." My eyes moved to the attached power of attorney document. It was a single page notarized with a signature at the bottom that was supposed to be mine. I looked at that signature for a long time. "That is not my signature," I said. Raymond looked at me sharply. "You're certain? I have signed my name the same way for 40 years. I pressed my finger to the page just below the forged line. The last stroke of the Y in Calloway, I always pull it upward and loop it back. It is a habit from grade school that I never corrected. I tapped the document. "This one goes down and curves left. Whoever did this was close, but not close enough." Raymond pulled out his phone and photographed every page, quick, precise movements, the efficiency of a man who had just identified the cornerstone of a criminal case and was being very careful not to let himself feel it, yet because there was still work to do. "The notary stamp," I said, pointing to the seal at the bottom of the power of attorney. "How does someone get a notary to certify a document with a forged signature?" Raymond straightened up. "A notary public in Texas is required by law to verify the identity of the person signing in front of them and to witness the signature being made in person. But some notaries, particularly those operating outside proper professional standards, will certify documents without performing that verification." His expression hardened. "It is called notary fraud, and it is itself a criminal offense under Texas law. The person who stamped this document is potentially liable alongside whoever forged the signature." He tapped the stamp. "Marcus will have the notary's identity by this afternoon." "And the real estate broker?" I asked. The transaction page showed a broker commission had been paid a percentage of the property value transferred at closing. Raymond checked the bottom of the transferred document. "Julian Pierce, licensed Texas real estate broker, listed address in Uptown Dallas." He wrote the name down. "We will need to speak with him." I stepped back from the table. My chest was so tight it was difficult to draw a full breath. I had bought that house outright, so Clara would always have somewhere safe. I had pressed the keys into her hand in that driveway and told her this was hers. And while I was sitting in a bare-walled apartment overseas, wiring money home every month, Evelyn had walked into this very office with a forged signature on a legal document and transferred my daughter's home into her own name. She did all of this, I said. My voice came out shaking in a way I had not intended and could not stop. While I was sending money home believing I was being a decent father, she was here dismantling everything I had built for Clara, piece by piece. And the whole time, she was sending me updates and photos and I was thanking her. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth and breathed through my nose. My daughter slept under a bridge, I said. The words came out broken at the edges. She gave a 10-year-old boy half a dinner roll because there was nothing else. And Evelyn was living in that house. The house I paid for so Clara would always have somewhere safe to land. Raymond put his hand on my shoulder, brief, firm, the gesture of a man who had known me 30 years and understood that what I needed right then was not words. I needed someone to stand beside me. She made mistakes, he said quietly. Calculated people always do, and we are going to find every single one of them. We left the records office just before noon. On the drive back, Raymond called Marcus and relayed the notary information. I stared out the passenger window and forced myself to think practically next steps documentation evidence because the alternative was a grief and a rage so enormous I did not know what it would do to me if I let it out fully in the front seat of Raymond's car. When we pulled up outside the hotel, my phone showed a text from Clara. Leo and I are doing okay. He found the pool. He wants to know if you can swim. I read it twice. Then I typed back, tell him I'll race him tomorrow. Get some rest. I put the phone in my pocket and looked up at the hotel entrance. Victor Salinas, the overnight security guard at my old office building on McKinney Avenue, had left a voicemail while we were at the records office. Raymond had flagged his name that morning. Victor kept a handwritten visitor log going back years, a personal habit from his time with Dallas P.D. He remembered the day Evelyn and a man he did not recognize had come to the building to collect documents from my former office approximately 4 years and 8 months ago. 1 month before the property transfer was filed, Raymond listened to the voicemail and made a note without changing expression. I'll have Marcus pull the visitor log entry tomorrow, he said. That places Evelyn and Julian Pierce at your office together before the deed was executed. That is premeditation, Arthur. That matters. I nodded. My jaw was still aching from how hard I had been holding it. There was still more to find. I could feel it the way you feel a current under still water, invisible but moving, pulling everything in one direction. We were not done yet. Not even close. That evening, I went back to the shelter. Not to plan the next move, not to gather more evidence or compare notes with Raymond, or add another line to the growing list of things Evelyn had done. I went because I had spent the entire day reading financial records and property documents and bank statements, and all of those pages told me what had happened to my daughter in numbers and dates and legal terminology. But numbers and dates and legal terminology are not the same thing as the truth. The truth was sitting in a small meeting room on Harwood Street, and I needed to hear it from her directly. Margaret Holt met me at the entrance with a nod that asked no questions and offered no commentary. The particular grace of a woman who had learned that sometimes the most useful thing you can do for a person is simply get out of their way. She led me down the hallway and knocked twice on the meeting room door, then stepped aside. Clara was already at the table when I came in. She had a cup of chamomile tea wrapped in both hands, and she was sitting very straight, the kind of straight that costs something that you maintain, not because you feel strong, but because you cannot afford to let yourself feel otherwise. She looked at my face when I walked in, and whatever she saw there made her set the cup down carefully. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough," I said, "but we're building a case. Raymond is good at what he does." I sat down across from her. "Tonight I don't want to talk about the case. I want to know what the last 3 years looked like for you, not from a financial report, from you." Clara curled both hands around the mug again. Her jaw moved slightly the way it does when a person is deciding not where to begin, but whether to begin at all. "You sure you want to hear all of it?" she said quietly. Every word I said. She took a breath and started talking. The debt letters began arriving about 3 years ago. Statements from lenders she had never contacted, collection notices for accounts she had never opened. At first she assumed it was a clerical error, the kind of administrative mistake that gets resolved with a phone call and a letter. She disputed the accounts. She called the numbers on the statements and explained calmly, and then less calmly, that she had not borrowed this money and did not owe these debts. But every account carried her full legal name, her date of birth, her social security number. The signatures on the original applications were close enough to her own handwriting that even she second-guessed herself when she looked at them directly. I didn't have money for a lawyer, she said. Her voice was flat in the specific way that voices go flat when a person has made peace with a wound they cannot afford to keep reopening. And there was no one to help me figure out what was happening. Thomas said it was my problem to handle. His mother stopped returning my calls entirely. She paused. So, I handled it. Tell me how, I said. Though part of me already knew that hearing it was going to be worse than anything the financial reports had shown me. I sold the car first, she said. The Honda, got $4,000 for it and paid off the smallest account. I told myself that would stop the bleeding. She looked at the table. It didn't. More letters came the next month. Different lenders, larger amounts. She kept going. With every sentence, the pressure in my chest built another degree. She sold the dining table to a second-hand shop on Greenville Avenue. She sold the bookshelves, the television, the kitchen appliances she did not strictly need. She sold the gold chain with the crescent moon pendant that Eleanor had given her on her 16th birthday, walked into a pawn shop on a Tuesday morning, and told the man behind the counter it was jewelry she no longer wore. That wasn't true, she said. Her voice cracked for the first time. I wore it every single day until I sold it. For weeks afterward, I kept reaching up to touch it, and it wasn't there. My eyes were burning. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and held them there. She sold Eleanor's sapphire bracelet. She sold the pearl earrings Eleanor had worn to Clara's college graduation. She sold a small diamond ring that had belonged to Eleanor's own mother, a piece that had passed through 3 generations of women in our family before Clara held it in her palm and carried it into a pawn shop because the power bill was $300 overdue. Mom's ring, I said. My voice had no volume left in it. I held on to it the longest, Clara said. She was crying now, not sobbing, just steady tears running down her face, the way water runs when a dam has finally given up trying to hold. Every time I thought about selling it, I put it back in the box. But then there was a month when Leo needed new shoes for school, and I was short on the electric bill, and She pressed her lips together hard. I told myself Mom would have understood. She would have, I said. She absolutely would have. I know. Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. But knowing that didn't make it stop hurting. Leo came to the doorway, then appearing soundlessly the way children do when they have learned to move quietly through spaces where adults are struggling. He looked at his mother's face, then at mine, with those dark, careful eyes that had been reading rooms since before he should have had to. His mom cried a lot, he said. He was not saying it to wound anyone. He was saying it the way children state facts they have been carrying alone for too long and have finally found someone safe enough to put down. But she never cried in front of me. She always waited until she thought I was asleep. He looked directly at me. I wasn't always asleep, Grandpa. The room went very quiet. Clara let out a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, something that lived in the space between the two and reached out and pulled Leo against her side. He let her leaning into her with the easy trust of a boy who has had exactly one constant in his life and has learned to hold on to it with everything he has. I looked at them both across that folding table, in that small room that smelled like laundry detergent and chamomile, and I felt something shift in my chest, not the grief which was still there and enormous, but something underneath it. Something harder and quieter and more certain. Leo, I said, come here. He crossed the room, and I put both hands on his thin shoulders and looked at him straight. You have taken care of your mother, I said, for longer than any 10-year-old boy should ever have to. I need you to know that I see that. His chin wobbled once, just once. Then he set his jaw in an angle that was so completely Clara's that it stopped my breath for a moment. Are you going to fix it? He asked. Yes, I said. I am going to fix it. He studied my face for 3 full seconds with those serious dark eyes. Then he nodded one single nod, the nod of a child transferring the weight of something very heavy into hands. He has decided are large enough to hold it. Okay, he said. Good. Clara looked at me over the top of his head. Her eyes were red and wet and fierce all at once. The eyes of a woman who had been carrying an impossible weight for 3 years and had just been offered for the first time the chance to put it down. I squeezed Leo's shoulders, once then let go. There's something about Thomas, Clara said carefully when Leo had settled back beside her. Something I never told you, something I didn't fully understand myself until recently. She turned the mug slowly in her hands. When the debt letters first started coming, I went to Thomas. I showed him everything. I asked him to help me figure out what was happening. She stopped. And, I said, he told me not to worry about it, she said. That it was probably a mistake, that he would handle it. Her jaw tightened into a line I recognized. He never handled it. And 3 weeks later, his mother called and said they needed us out of the house. She looked at me, then really looked the way she had not quite allowed herself to do since I appeared under that overpass, and I saw something move behind her eyes, something she had been deciding for days whether to hand over. I think he already knew Dad, she said quietly. I think Thomas knew exactly where those debts came from. Marcus called at 7:45 the following morning. I was on my second cup of coffee at the hotel desk, going over the transfer records Raymond had printed for me the night before when the phone rang. Marcus Webb did not waste time on pleasantries. He had the direct, unhurried manner of a man who had spent 12 years with Dallas PD, learning that the most useful thing you can do in a difficult situation is tell the truth quickly and completely. I found something on Thomas Miller, he said. You need to hear this before you do anything else today. Go ahead, I said. I tracked down a cousin, Dennis Harmon. No, scratch that. He corrected himself immediately. Dennis Crane, Thomas's first cousin on his father's side. Estranged from the Miller family for 6 years after a business dispute with Beatrice. Lives in Fort Worth now. No contact with the Millers, no reason to protect them. And he talked, I said. He talked, Marcus confirmed. 5 years ago, Thomas told Dennis in confidence that a woman connected to his wife's family was quietly providing financial relief to the Millers. Thomas described it as someone helping the family in exchange for keeping things smooth on their end. Dennis didn't know the specifics, but he told me Thomas used one phrase he never forgot. A pause. Thomas called it a business arrangement. I set down my coffee cup. A business arrangement. My daughter selling her dead mother's jewelry to pay debts she had never created, and Thomas Miller had looked at that and called it a business arrangement. There's more, Marcus said. I pulled the corporate filings for Thomas's contracting company Miller Home Solutions registered in Dallas County. 2 separate contracts awarded in the past 4 years, combined value just under $400,000. The contracting entity that awarded both jobs traces back through 2 holding companies to a property management firm that Evelyn controls directly. The number landed in my chest like a stone dropped from a considerable height. She paid him in contracts, I said. Indirect payments, Marcus said. Harder to trace than wire transfers, but the paper trail is there if you know where to look, and now we know where to look. I thanked him and hung up. I sat at the desk for 60 seconds doing nothing but breathing, which was about all I trusted myself to do. Then I called Raymond. I want to talk to Thomas Miller directly, I said when he picked up. Arthur Fours. Not to threaten him, not to give anything away about the case. I want to look at him. I kept my voice level. There are conversations a lawyer cannot have on a client's behalf. This is one of them. A pause. Marcus has the address, Raymond said. He did not argue further. He knew me well enough to recognize when a decision had already been made. Thomas Miller was renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Mesquite, east of Dallas. Same floor plan as every unit in the complex lawn, trimmed to exactly the standard the lease required. A Dallas Cowboys flag hanging limp in the still October air above the front door. I rang the bell at 6:30 in the evening. He answered on the second ring. 39 years old and looked older, shorter hair than the photographs Clara had shown me years ago. Deeper lines around his eyes, the particular hollowness of a man who had been living with something uncomfortable for long enough that it had started to show in his face. He looked at me and went completely still, not surprised, but braced. The expression of a person who has been waiting for an unpleasant knock and has finally heard it. Mr. Calloway, he said. 10 minutes, I said. That's all I'm asking. He stepped back and let me in. Sparse furniture, a couch, a television, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, and on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of Texas, a child's drawing in blue marker, a house, 2 figures, a sun in the upper right corner, Leo's handwriting in the lower left. Thomas had kept one of Leo's drawings. That detail cost me something I had not expected. I sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the surface between us and looked at them rather than at me. You knew, I said. Not everything, but enough. He did not deny it. His jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly through his nose. I knew money was coming from Evelyn's side, he said. His voice came out hollow, stripped of the professional composure he had probably rehearsed on the drive over from wherever he had been when he saw my name on his phone. I knew my mother was receiving payments. I told myself families help each other in complicated ways. He stopped. I told myself it would stop, but it didn't stop, I said. It got worse every year, and while it was getting worse, your wife was selling her dead mother's jewelry to cover debts that were never hers. His face contracted sharply. His eyes went red at the rims. I didn't know it had gone that far, he said. I swear to you I didn't know about the accounts she opened under Clara's name. I didn't know about the house. You didn't want to know, I said. I kept my voice level and quiet because anger lets people off too easily. It gives them something to push back against, and that is not what I wanted from Thomas Miller. I wanted the truth, and the truth requires stillness. That is a very different thing from not knowing. You accepted payments through your business. You accepted the contract work. You let your mother take the money. And when Clara came to you with letters from debt collectors, she didn't understand. You told her to let you handle it, and then you did nothing. He looked up at me then. His eyes were wet and his jaw was working hard against something that wanted to come out and that he was not ready to let go of yet. She loved you, I said. Clara loved you through all of it. She sold everything her mother left her trying to hold your family together. And you sat across a kitchen table from her and told her it was probably a clerical error. The first tear moved down his face. He wiped it with the back of his hand quickly. The gesture of a man who is ashamed of crying and more ashamed of what he is crying about. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out hoarse and cracked. For whatever that's worth. It's worth something, I said. Not enough, but something. I stood up. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a small USB drive on the table between us. It was no larger than my thumbnail. Everything she said to me, he said. Every meeting, every instruction she gave me about what to tell Clara, what not to tell Clara, who to contact and who to avoid. I kept records of all of it, voice memos from 2 phone calls she made directly to me, time-stamped. He looked at the drive, not at me. I've been keeping it because I didn't know what else to do with it, and because I was afraid. I picked up the drive and held it in my palm. A voluntary statement to Raymond Sterling's office. I said, everything you just told me on record, everything on this drive turned over completely. That is what this is worth. He nodded once. Whatever the court orders, he said. I won't fight it. I tucked the drive into my coat pocket and walked to the door. I stopped with my hand on the frame and looked back at him once. For what it is worth, Thomas, what you did has a name under Texas law. Conspiracy to commit fraud. What you are doing right now is the only reason a prosecutor might consider anything other than the maximum exposure. I held his gaze. Do not waste it. I walked out into the October evening and stood on the sidewalk with the drive pressed against my ribs and thought about a little boy who kept his mother's drawings in blue marker and did not cry when his school supplies were packed into garbage bags. Then I called Raymond. He gave us everything, I said. Raymond was already talking when he picked up. Good, he said when I told him Thomas had given us the drive. Because Marcus just called me with something else. Come to the office tonight. There is a name I want to discuss before we move on Julian Pierce tomorrow. I drove back to Commerce Street with the radio off and the windows cracked and the October air moving through the car, cold and sharp the way Texas air gets when the season finally decides to change. My phone sat on the passenger seat. The USB drive was in my coat pocket. I kept one hand on the wheel and thought about a little boy who had kept one of Leo's drawings on his refrigerator for reasons I would probably never fully understand. And I told myself that people were complicated, and that complexity was not the same thing as innocence. Raymond had fresh coffee waiting, and the kind of expression on his face that I had come to recognize over 30 years of friendship. The expression he wore when the information he was about to deliver was worse than expected, and he had already decided that honesty was the only thing worth offering. Victor Salinas called this afternoon, he said, settling into his chair. He found the entry in his visitor log, 4 years and 8 months ago, a Tuesday afternoon in late January. A woman matching Evelyn's description signed in at the front desk of your old office building on McKinney Avenue. She listed herself as your spouse. The man with her signed in as a property consultant. Raymond turned his legal pad so I could read the name written there. Julian Pierce. I looked at the name 1 month before the warranty deed was filed. They were at my office together, I said. Collecting documents from your former suite, Raymond confirmed. The building manager at the time, since retired, allowed access based on Evelyn's claim that she was handling your estate affairs. Victor logged the visit because he logs everything. 12 years of habit from his time on the force. Raymond tapped the legal pad. That entry places Evelyn and Julian Pierce at your office building together 1 month before the property transfer was executed. That is not coincidence. That is preparation. I did not say anything for a moment. I was thinking about Evelyn walking through the lobby of my office building, with a real estate broker beside her, smiling at the front desk, signing her name in a visitor log, as my wife collecting whatever she needed to complete a transaction she had been planning for months. Now, Raymond said about Julian Pierce. Julian Pierce's office was on McKinney Avenue in uptown Dallas, all glass and brushed steel, the kind of storefront designed to communicate that the person inside understood what things were worth. We arrived the following afternoon. The receptionist showed us in without much hesitation, which told me Raymond had called ahead in terms that made hesitation seem unwise. Julian Pierce was in his late 40s, well-dressed with the groomed confidence of a man who had built a career on the ability to make other people feel that transactions were going smoothly. He stood when we entered, extended his hand and smiled with the practiced ease of someone who had navigated difficult conversations before and expected to navigate this one the same way. He was wrong about that. "Mr. Pierce," Raymond said, settling into the chair across from the desk, with the unhurried patience of a man who already knew the ending and was simply walking toward it at a deliberate pace. "We are here about the property transfer on Birchwood Lane, specifically a warranty deed executed 4 years and 9 months ago, transferring title from Arthur Calloway by power of attorney to Evelyn Calloway. You were the broker of record." Julian's expression held. "I handle a significant volume of transactions," he said pleasantly. "I would need to pull the file to—" "I have the file," Raymond said. He reached into his briefcase and placed the documents on the desk one at a time. The warranty deed, the power of attorney, the broker commission record with Julian's license number printed clearly at the bottom. Then he placed a second document on top of the first, a bank record, a wire transfer of $15,000 from an account held by Evelyn Calloway to a personal account held by Julian Pierce dated 3 days before the transaction closed. Julian looked at the bank record. The pleasant expression did not disappear all at once. It faded the way daylight fades gradually, then completely. "That was a consulting fee," he said. His voice had thinned. "Julian," Raymond's tone was not unkind, but it was absolute. "We have the forged power of attorney. We have the notary fraud documentation. We have a recorded conversation in which Evelyn Calloway discusses this transaction by name with a witness. We have a visitor log placing you at Arthur Calloway's office building, alongside Evelyn 1 month before the deed was executed." He leaned forward slightly. "I am not here to surprise you. I am here to tell you that when this goes before a judge, and it will go before a judge, the broker of record on a fraudulent property transfer, who received $15,000 3 days before closing, will be a significant figure in those proceedings." He paused. "How significant depends entirely on what you do in the next 10 minutes. Julian Pierce sat very still for a long moment. Then something went out of him, not dramatically, not all at once, but in stages the way a building settles when the foundation finally gives. His shoulders dropped a fraction. He set his pen down on the desk with a small, careful click. He pressed both palms flat on the surface in front of him and looked at them. "She came to me with the paperwork already prepared," he said. His voice was quiet now, stripped of its professional finish. "The power of attorney, the deed, the supporting identification. She said it was a family matter, that her husband had authorized the transfer and was working overseas and couldn't attend closing in person." He stopped. "I asked for secondary identification. She had it. The documents looked correct. The signatures looked correct." He looked up at me, then, not at Raymond, at me. "I knew something felt wrong," he said. "I have been doing this for 22 years. I know what a clean transaction feels like. This one didn't feel clean." His jaw tightened. His eyes went red at the corners. "But I had $15,000 sitting in my account, and a file that looked legal on its face, and I told myself it was a family dispute that wasn't my business to referee." Julian Pierce did not look away. He took that in with his eyes open, which I respected even as I despised what had made it necessary. "What do you need from me?" he said. "A full written statement," Raymond said. "Everything she said, everything she showed you, the exact circumstances of the $15,000 payment, signed and notarized." "My license?" Julian said flatly. "Almost certainly," Raymond said. "But a voluntary statement given before charges are filed carries weight that testimony under subpoena does not. This is the better path, the only one that gives you any control over what happens next." Julian pulled a legal pad toward him. His hands were shaking now, the real ones underneath the 22 years of professional composure. He picked up his pen and began to write. I walked to the window while Raymond guided him through the statement. Below on McKinney Avenue, the afternoon traffic moved at its ordinary pace, the city entirely indifferent to the fact that a man was writing down the truth about a choice he had made almost 5 years ago, that had cost my daughter a home. When Julian finished signing, Raymond capped his pen and closed his briefcase. In the elevator going down, he said nothing for a moment. Then he made a small sound of quiet satisfaction. "Marcus called while you were parking this morning," he said. "He has been looking into Evelyn's history before Dallas." He glanced at me. Her name was not always Evelyn Arthur, and this was not the first time. The elevator doors opened onto McKinney Avenue. I stepped out into the October air and felt the cold of it move through my coat, and I thought about a woman who had walked into this very building 4 years ago, with Julian Pierce beside her, and a forged signature in her hand, and a plan she had been building for years. Not the first time. Marcus had worked through the night. I knew that before he said a word, because when Raymond's office door opened at 7 the following morning, and Marcus Webb walked in, he was carrying a folder thick enough to stop a door, and wearing the particular expression of a man who has been awake for 20 hours on purpose and considers it time well spent. He set the folder on Raymond's desk without preamble and pulled up a chair. "Her real name is Evelyn Cross," he said. "Or it was 22 years ago. Before Dallas, before Phoenix, before she became the woman you married, she was Evelyn Cross operating out of Buckhead, Georgia." I kept my hands flat on my knees and said nothing. I had learned in the past several days that the most useful thing I could do when Marcus was delivering information was stay completely still and let him deliver it. 22 years ago, Marcus continued opening the folder to the first page. A civil fraud complaint was filed in Fulton County, Georgia, against a woman matching Evelyn's description. Same approximate age, same physical profile. The complainant was the adult daughter of a wealthy widower in Buckhead. The father, elderly, recently bereaved, living alone, had met a woman named Evelyn Cross through a mutual social acquaintance. Within 18 months, she had moved into the family home. Within 3 years, approximately $400,000 in assets had moved from the father's accounts into accounts she controlled. Raymond leaned forward. "How was it discovered, Monsieur?" The daughter hired a forensic accountant when her father's estate attorney flagged some irregular transfers. By the time they understood the full scope of what had happened, Evelyn Cross had already begun moving money out of the state. Marcus turned to the next page. The family filed a civil complaint. Evelyn's attorney negotiated a settlement. She repaid a fraction of what she had taken, signed a non-disclosure agreement, and the case was sealed by mutual agreement. Then she disappeared from Georgia entirely. I pressed both fists against the edge of the desk and stared at the page in front of me. $400,000. An elderly widower, an adult daughter who had watched her father be systematically stripped of everything while she tried to understand what was happening and found herself 2 steps behind at every turn. I knew exactly what that felt like. "She changed her name within 18 months of the settlement," Marcus said. "Evelyn Cross became Evelyn Voss. She relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, where she remained for several years. Then she entered a brief marriage, 14 months, to a man named Gerald Carroll. When that marriage ended, she took his name and became Evelyn Carroll." He paused. "When she married you, she became Evelyn Calloway. Arthur, you were not the second person she did this to. You were at minimum the third." The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "She practiced on other families," I said. My voice came out hollow and very controlled, the voice I used when the alternative was something I could not afford in Raymond's office at 7 in the morning. "She refined the method. She got better at it. The Georgia case tells us she has been operating this way for over 2 decades, Raymond said. He picked up his pen. "Under Rule 404B of the Federal Rules of Evidence, a prosecutor can introduce evidence of prior bad acts to establish a pattern of behavior and demonstrate intent. It is not admissible to show that she is generally a bad person, but it is admissible to show that this conduct targeting bereaved individuals building fraudulent financial structures, changing identities to escape consequences, is a deliberate and repeated pattern. He looked at me steadily. This is not just your case anymore, Arthur. This is a documented pattern of predatory conduct across multiple victims, multiple states, multiple identities. That changes the sentencing exposure significantly. The Georgia family? I said. The daughter. Marcus nodded. I made contact yesterday afternoon. Her name is Sandra Whitmore. She is 63 years old, and she has been waiting 22 years for the non-disclosure agreement she signed under duress to be legally challenged. He looked at me with the level, unhurried certainty of a man delivering the most important line of a very long briefing. She will testify. I stood up. My legs needed the movement. I walked to the window and stood there with both hands in my pockets and looked out at Commerce Street below, at the ordinary Tuesday morning traffic and the coffee cart on the corner and the people walking past who had no idea that in a 14th floor office above them, the final architecture of a 22-year pattern of destruction was being laid out on a desk. Eleanor had died 14 years ago. 2 years before she died, Evelyn Cross had already moved to Dallas. She had not swooped in after Eleanor got sick. She had not appeared opportunistically in the aftermath of my grief. She had moved to this city, begun attending professional events where my name appeared on the guest lists, and positioned herself with the patience of someone who understood that the right moment would come if she simply waited long enough. My wife was dying, and Evelyn was already here, already watching, already planning. She watched me bury Eleanor, I said to the window. The words came out barely above a breath. She stood at the edge of my grief, and she waited for the right moment to walk through it. Yes, Raymond said simply. He did not try to soften it, because there was no version of it that was soft. I turned back from the window. My jaw was set so hard it ached all the way up to my temples. But underneath the pain and the fury and the cold structural rage that had been building in me for days, something else had clarified, something harder and more useful. What is next? I said. There is one more piece, Raymond said. He reached for his phone, which had buzzed twice while Marcus was speaking. He looked at the screen and then looked at me with an expression I had not seen from him before. Careful, measured, carrying the particular weight of a man who is about to open a door he knows cannot be closed again. I have an email from a man named Franklin Cross, he said. He is an attorney on Knox Street. He says he was Eleanor's private counsel, not your shared firm, but her own lawyer separately retained. Raymond set the phone down on the desk. He says he has something that belongs to Clara. I stopped breathing for a moment. 26 years. Eleanor had retained a private attorney 26 years ago, 2 years before she was diagnosed, long before any of this began, and that attorney had been holding something for Clara ever since. Set up the meeting, I said. Raymond was already typing. Franklin Cross's office was on Knox Street in a building that looked like it had been standing since before Dallas had highways. 3 stories of dark brick, a brass nameplate beside the entrance door that had been polished so many times, the letters had gone slightly soft at the edges. The elevator was paneled in wood and moved slowly, and Raymond and I rode it to the 2nd floor without speaking. We had both said everything that needed saying in the car. What was waiting in that office had been waiting for 26 years and could hold for another 30 seconds. Franklin Cross answered the door before we could knock. He was 75 years old and built like a man who had spent those years doing something purposeful with them. Broad shoulders, slightly stooped. Now white hair neatly combed, a handshake that was still firm and unhurried. His eyes were gray and very clear, the kind of eyes that had witnessed enough of human behavior to stop being rattled by most of it. He looked at me for a long moment after we shook hands, studying my face with the directness of someone who had heard a great deal about me from a woman who was no longer alive to make the introduction herself. Your wife spoke about you often, he said. Come in. His office smelled like old books and coffee, and something I could not immediately name, a particular quality of stillness. The stillness of a room where important things had been kept safe for a very long time. 2 chairs had been arranged in front of his desk. He had been expecting us. On the desk itself sat 2 items. A sealed envelope, cream-colored, the flap closed with red wax, and beside it, a thin manila folder. I recognized Eleanor's handwriting on the front of the envelope before Franklin had finished pulling his chair out. The letters were careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who had always believed that how you wrote something mattered as much as what you wrote. For Clara, when the time comes. My throat closed so fast it nearly choked me. I sat down. I put my hands flat on my knees because I did not trust them to stay still anywhere else. How long did you know Eleanor? Raymond asked, his legal pad already open. 26 years, Franklin said. He settled into his chair with the unhurried manner of a man who understood that some conversations needed room to breathe. She came to me separately from your shared firm because she wanted counsel that was entirely her own. Not adversarial, she trusted you completely, Mr. Calloway. But she was a careful woman. She understood that there are things a person needs to protect independently. He paused, particularly when she suspected she might not have as much time as she would have liked. I looked up. She knew she was sick before she told me. Franklin's expression was gentle but honest. She suspected for several months before the diagnosis was confirmed. She used that time to put certain things in order. He reached forward and opened the manila folder. This is a codicil, a legal addendum to her primary will. It was drafted, witnessed, and executed entirely independently of your joint estate documents. 2 witnesses completely unconnected to either family. Fully valid under the Texas Estates Code. He folded his hands on the desk. I should explain why I held it rather than filing it through probate immediately after Eleanor passed. Her instructions to me were very specific. The codicil contains a contingency clause. It is operative only in the event of what the document terms fraudulent deprivation of Clara's assets. He met my eyes steadily. Eleanor's exact instruction was to hold the document until there was documented evidence that the contingency had been triggered. Filing it prematurely without that evidence would have exposed it to legal challenge and potentially rendered it unenforceable. Raymond had leaned forward. His reading glasses were on, and his pen was moving. When Evelyn contacted me twice this past spring, Franklin continued, asking whether I still held any documents related to Eleanor's estate. I understood that the contingency had been triggered. I began waiting for the right moment. He looked at me. When Raymond Sterling called my office yesterday, I understood the moment had arrived. What does the codicil address specifically? Raymond asked. Franklin slid the folder across the desk. The primary clause deals with Clara's inheritance rights in the event of fraudulent deprivation. Eleanor's exact language reads as follows. He opened the folder to a marked page and read carefully. Should Clara be deprived of any asset, property, or financial inheritance through forgery, coercion, and deception, or any other fraudulent means, all such transactions shall be deemed void and unenforceable, and full ownership and entitlement shall revert to Clara unconditionally, regardless of any subsequent transfer of title or liquidation of assets. The room was very quiet. Raymond set his pen down. He read the clause again, silently, his lips moving slightly. Then he looked up at me, and in his expression, the careful, controlled expression of a lawyer who had spent 40 years learning not to show excitement. Prematurely, I saw something I had not seen since I walked off that plane: certainty. Every transfer Evelyn executed is void, Raymond said quietly. The house reverts to Clara. The fraudulent accounts are recoverable. The civil judgment proceeds from here. He looked at Franklin. Combined with the forged power of attorney, the wire fraud documentation, and the evidence we have already assembled, this codicil is the cornerstone. Everything else we have built supports it. This is what holds the entire structure together. I reached out and picked up the sealed envelope from the desk. Eleanor's handwriting. For Clara. When the time comes. 26 years this envelope had sat in Franklin Cross's office. 26 years while Eleanor raised a daughter and got sick and died. And while I went overseas, and while Evelyn dismantled everything we had built, and while Clara sold her mother's jewelry and slept in a shelter. And this piece of paper, Eleanor's last act of protection for the child she loved more than anything, had been waiting in a locked drawer 2 miles from where it was needed. She knew, I said. My voice came out rough and low. Eleanor knew something like this could happen. She didn't know the specifics. She couldn't have. But she knew that a man grieving alone with assets and a trusting daughter was vulnerable. I pressed my fingers carefully against the wax seal. She loved Clara with everything she had, and she made sure that love had legal teeth. Franklin nodded. She was the most prepared client I have ever had, he said, and the most quietly fierce. Raymond began photographing the documents. I set the envelope down gently on the desk beside the folder where it would be safe for another few minutes. Then Franklin opened his desk drawer and produced a second envelope, smaller, newer, no wax seal. He held it for a moment before placing it on the desk between us. "There is one more thing," he said. His voice had shifted slightly, careful in a different way than before, the way a person's voice shifts when they are about to hand someone something they have been guarding for a long time. "When I received Eleanor's codicil 26 years ago, she gave me one additional instruction. She said that if the contingency was ever triggered, if Clara was ever deprived of what was hers, I was to look for a second document that might arrive separately." He paused. 6 years ago, a plain envelope appeared in my office mail. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter and a note that said, "In your handwriting, Mr. Calloway, hold this for Clara." I stared at the envelope. "I never sent that," I said. "I know," Franklin said quietly. "I have known for some time. The phrasing of the note did not sound like you, but I had no proof of anything and no basis to act, so I held it." His gray eyes were steady and kind. "The letter inside is in your handwriting. It is addressed to Clara, and she has never seen it." My hands were not steady when I reached for that envelope. They were shaking in a way I had stopped trying to hide 3 days ago, when I had decided that a man my age had earned the right to let things show. "This belongs to Clara," Franklin said. "It always did." I carried the envelope inside my coat the entire drive back to the hotel, not in my briefcase, not on the seat beside me, against my ribs where I could feel it with every breath, where it could not slide or shift or be forgotten. Raymond drove and said nothing, which was the right thing to do. There are no words useful enough for the space between learning that a letter exists and deciding what to do with it, and Raymond had 30 years of practice knowing when words were not the thing. I had written that letter at the kitchen table at 5 o'clock in the morning 6 years ago, the day I flew out to the offshore rig that would keep me completely isolated from ordinary communication for the better part of a year. The rig operated on a satellite communication system controlled by the company. Incoming and outgoing messages routed through a single monitored channel, personal calls, scheduled in advance internet access, limited to a terminal in the common room with a 30-minute daily limit per person. I had told Evelyn this before I left. She had nodded and said she would handle everything. I had believed her because I had not yet learned what it meant when Evelyn said she would handle something. The letter had taken me an hour to write. I had told Clara things I had not managed to say face to face, that I was sorry for the years I had spent more present in boardrooms than in her life, that the work overseas was supposed to be the last of it, that I intended to come back properly and stay properly and be the father I had been meaning to be since Eleanor died, and left a space in our family that I had tried to fill with productivity instead of presence. I had told her I loved her and Leo more than I had ever found adequate language for. I had left the letter on the kitchen counter with her name on the front and asked Evelyn to make sure it reached her. 6 years, she had never read a single word of it. I texted Clara from the hotel lobby. "Can I come up? I have something for you." She texted back in, under a minute. "We're here. Leo's doing homework." The hallway outside her room smelled like the hotel's industrial cleaning products, and faintly like the microwave popcorn Leo had apparently discovered in the mini kitchen down the hall. I knocked twice. Clara opened the door, still holding a pencil. Leo visible behind her at the small table, with a worksheet spread out in front of him, his tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth, the way it always was when he was concentrating. "Dad." She looked at my face, and her expression shifted immediately. "What happened?" "Nothing bad," I said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. I crossed the room and sat in the chair across from the table, and I reached inside my coat and took out the envelope and placed it on the table between us. Clara looked at it. She looked at the handwriting on the front, her name in my hand, the same looping letters I had used my entire adult life, and her face went through 3 separate things in the space of 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, and then something deeper and slower, something that moved through her like a tide coming in. "What is this?" she said. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I wrote it 6 years ago," I said. "The morning I flew out to the rig, I left it for Evelyn to give to you. I kept my voice steady because one of us needed to be steady, and it was going to have to be me. Franklin Cross has been holding it. Evelyn sent it to his office with a note in my handwriting, asking him to keep it. She did not want you to read it." Clara stared at the envelope. She did not move for a long moment. Then she reached out and picked it up with both hands carefully, the way you pick up something that has already been through enough. She broke the seal, she unfolded the single page inside, and I watched her read. I had memorized most of what I wrote that morning, not intentionally, but the way you memorize things you meant, with everything you had. I watched her eyes move across the lines, and I knew exactly where she was by the changes in her face. The opening paragraph, where I apologized. The middle, where I told her about the plans I had made to come home for good within 2 years. The part near the end where I wrote about Leo, that I had a photograph of him taped to the wall above my bunk on the rig, that I looked at it every morning, that becoming his grandfather was one of the 2 best things that had ever happened to me, and she knew what the other one was. Clara made a sound that was not a word. It came from somewhere below language, low and broken and completely unguarded, and she pressed one hand flat against her sternum as if she needed to hold something in place. 6 years, she said. Her voice cracked completely on the second word. Dad, I thought just after you went to the rig, the messages stopped coming. Evelyn said the communication system was unreliable. I thought you had stopped. She could not finish the sentence. Tears were running freely down her face, and her shoulders were shaking with the force of something she had been carrying for 6 years, without knowing it had a name, without knowing it was not what she thought it was. Leo looked up from his homework. He took one look at his mother's face and pushed his chair back and crossed the room and put both arms around her from behind, pressing his cheek against her shoulder blade, the way he had probably done 1,000 times in the past 3 years, when the weight of everything got too heavy for one person to hold upright. Mom, he said, just that. Just her name said, the way children say the names of the people they love when words are insufficient and presence is the only thing they have to offer. Clara grabbed his arms and held on. The letter was still in her other hand, pressed against her heart. I reached across the table and covered her hand, the one holding the letter, with both of mine. My eyes were burning so fiercely I had stopped pretending they were not. My voice, when it came, was shaking in a way that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with 6 years of distance and 47 returned letters and one envelope that had been sitting in a locked drawer when it should have been sitting in my daughter's hands. I never stopped, I said. Not for a single day. I need you to know that. Clara let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for the entire 6 years and had finally found a way out. She pressed her forehead down against our joined hands, mine and hers, and the letter between them, and sobbed in a way that was not grief exactly, not anymore, but something adjacent to grief that lives on the other side of it. The sound of a person who has been alone inside a particular pain for so long that being understood feels almost violent. Leo tightened his arms around her. Grandpa, he said, looking at me over the top of her bowed head with those serious dark eyes. Are you crying too? I looked at him. My grandson, 10 years old, standing in a hotel room in Dallas, holding his mother together with both arms, asking a perfectly reasonable question. Yeah, bud, I said, a little bit. He considered this with the gravity of a child processing new information about the adults in his life. That's okay, he said, with the absolute authority of someone who has thought about this carefully and reached a firm conclusion. Mom says crying means something really matters. Clara laughed, a broken, trembling, completely real sound that surprised her as much as it surprised me. She raised her head and looked at Leo with red eyes and a jaw that was still working against everything she was feeling, and she pulled him around to her side and held him there. I sat back in my chair and let the moment settle around us, the 3 of us. The letter on the table between our hands, the evening light going orange and quiet through the hotel curtains. Then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. I looked at the screen for a moment, then I answered. The voice on the other end was calm and familiar, and made every muscle in my body go rigid in the specific way they go, rigid when something you have been bracing for finally arrives. Arthur, Evelyn said, I think it's time we talked. I did not call Evelyn back that night. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long moment after the call ended, phone in my hand, her voice still sitting in my ear, like something that had gotten in and could not find its way back out. Then I called Raymond. She reached out, I said when he picked up. I expected she would. His voice was alert but unsurprised. What did she say? 4 words, that it was time we talked. A pause. Don't call her back. Don't respond at all until we've spoken tomorrow morning. If she calls again tonight, let it go to voicemail. Another pause. Arthur, The fact that she is reaching out means she knows the walls are closing. People who believe they are safe do not initiate contact. Let her sit with that. I set the phone down and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Raymond was right. I knew he was right. But there is a specific kind of difficulty in staying still when the person who destroyed your family is on the other end of a phone line asking to negotiate, and I had to remind myself 3 separate times that night that stillness was more dangerous to Evelyn than anything I could say. Marcus called the following morning at 7:40. I was already at Raymond's office, coffee in hand, when the call came through on speaker. Marcus had spent the previous 48 hours pulling threads that Raymond had flagged after the Franklin Cross meeting, specifically anything Evelyn had done in the period immediately following the announcement of Arthur's supposed death, when she would have believed herself completely secure. 2 things, Marcus said. No preamble. First one is bad. Second one is worse. Raymond clicked his pen. Go ahead. About 3 years ago, a woman named Sandra Whitmore, not the Georgia. Sandra Whitmore, different person, entirely received a handwritten letter, purportedly from Arthur Calloway. The letter was sent to Clara at her home address at the time, care of Evelyn, who told Clara she had found it among Arthur's personal effects. Marcus paused. The letter expressed disappointment. Specifically, it said that Arthur had observed Clara's behavior in the marriage from a distance and found her lacking in the commitment and effort a good wife owed her family. It said he had made arrangements to ensure his estate went to someone who had, quote, actually taken care of things. The coffee cup in my hand stopped moving. That letter is not mine, I said. My voice came out very flat and very certain. I never wrote any such thing. We know, Raymond said. He was looking at me carefully. Marcus, how do we know it was fabricated? Same tell as the POA, Marcus said. The Y in Calloway. Goes down and curves left. Same forger almost certainly. And there is one other problem for Evelyn, the paper stock. The letter was written on personalized stationery that Arthur used for correspondence before he left for the rig. Marcus checked with the stationer on Lemon Avenue that produced the original order. Arthur's stationery order was placed 10 years ago. Evelyn would have had access to the remaining stock in the home. I set the cup down on Raymond's desk because I did not trust my hands with it. Clara read that letter, I said. Yes, Marcus said. She read a letter in my handwriting on my stationery that told her I was disappointed in her, that I thought she had failed as a wife, that I had left my estate to someone else. I pressed my fist against the center of my chest and breathed through it deliberately, one breath at a time. She read that while she was already grieving me, while she was already selling her mother's things to pay debts she didn't create, she read that and believed it. Arthur, Raymond started. How long, I said. How long did she believe it? Marcus was quiet for a moment. We will need to ask her directly, he said. But the timing suggests she received it about 8 months before the Millers forced her out of the house, which means she spent those 8 months believing her dead father had looked at her life and found it wanting. I stood up and walked to the window. I stood there with both hands pressed flat against the glass and breathed and did not speak for 30 seconds, because what I wanted to say was not something that would help anyone in that room. The second thing, Raymond said, his voice careful and steady. Marcus, about 2 years ago, Marcus continued, a charitable foundation was registered in Dallas County under the name Eleanor's Legacy Fund. The stated purpose was supporting families in housing transition. The registered agent was Evelyn Calloway. She contributed $20,000 of seed funding and received coverage in the Oak Cliff Observer, a community paper describing her as a devoted widow preserving the memory of her husband's first wife. A pause. The foundation hosted 2 small community events. Both were held at the property on Birchwood Lane. Raymond looked at me. She used Eleanor's name, I said. The words came out so quietly I was not sure Raymond heard them. She took Eleanor's name and put it on a charitable foundation and held events at the house she stole from my daughter, and let a community newspaper write about what a good person she was. Yes, Marcus said. I turned back from the window. The rage moving through me at that moment was the coldest I had ever felt. Not hot, not explosive, but clear and structural and absolutely determined, the kind of rage that does not want to shout, but simply wants to take apart every single thing the other person built and leave nothing standing. That evening, I brought what Marcus had found to Clara. She was in the meeting room at the shelter when I arrived the chamomile tea again, Leo down the hall. I sat across from her and I told her about the forged letter. I told her about the stationery, the handwriting analysis, the timeline. Clara listened without moving. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very carefully, "I read that letter 4 times, Dad. I kept it in my nightstand for 6 months." Her voice did not waver, which was somehow worse than if it had. Every time I started to feel angry about what was happening to me, the debts, Thomas, the house, I would think about that letter and tell myself I must have done something to deserve it, that you had seen something in me from far away that I couldn't see in myself. My jaw ached from how hard I was holding it. "I burned it eventually," she said. "About a week before the Millers changed the locks, I was standing in the backyard and I put a match to it and I watched it go." She looked at me steadily. "I thought I was letting go of your disappointment in me. I didn't know I was burning a forgery." I reached across the table and took both her hands in mine. She let me. "Listen to me," I said. "That letter was not mine, not one word of it. I have never been disappointed in you, not for a single day of your life, not once." I tightened my grip. "Do you hear me?" Clara's chin trembled once. Then she set her jaw in that stubborn angle that was pure Eleanor, pure 38 years of being exactly who she was, regardless of what the world did about it, and she nodded. "I hear you," she said. Then she told me about the day she walked past the house on Birchwood Lane with Leo and saw the sign for Eleanor's legacy fund in the front window the same week the Oak Cliff Observer ran the story about Evelyn's charitable work. Clara had stopped walking entirely. Leo had tugged her sleeve and asked why she wasn't moving. She had told him she was tired. She did not tell him that the woman being praised in that window for honoring Eleanor's memory was the same woman who had taken everything Eleanor had ever left behind. "I nearly fell down," Clara said. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said most things now, from a place so far past shock that the facts had simply become facts. I grabbed the lamppost on the corner, and I held on, and I told myself to keep walking, and I did. She looked at me. I kept walking because Leo was watching. I thought about my daughter holding a lamppost on a Dallas sidewalk, watching a charity sign, bearing her mother's name in the window of her stolen home, and keeping herself upright because her son was watching. "Patricia Vance called the shelter this afternoon," Margaret Holt said quietly from the doorway where she had appeared, without either of us noticing. She looked at me. "Leo's teacher. She says there is something about a scholarship she thinks you need to know." Patricia Vance arrived at the shelter the following morning at 9 o'clock. She was 38 years old, compact and direct, with the particular kind of energy that good elementary school teachers carry, the energy of someone who has spent years learning to hold 20 different children's realities simultaneously, without losing track of any of them. She had driven 40 minutes from her school in Oak Cliff, and she had brought a manila folder under one arm, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for permission to say something for a very long time. Margaret Holt brought us to the meeting room. Patricia set the folder on the table and looked at me with clear, steady eyes. "I have been Leo's teacher for 2 years, she said. "I want you to know what that has looked like." "Please," I said, "tell me everything." She told me. Leo had come to her class in September of last year, wearing a shirt with a fraying collar that he had tried to repair himself with a safety pin. He arrived early every single morning, not because he was eager, though he was, but because the school building was warm and reliable in a way that his living situation was not. He did his homework in the library during lunch because the shelter's common room was too loud for the kind of concentration his work required. He never complained. He never asked for help with anything that wasn't strictly academic. And he was, Patricia said without hesitation, one of the 3 most naturally gifted students she had taught in 14 years. "He reads 2 grade levels above his peers," she said. "His mathematical reasoning is exceptional. He asks questions that take me a moment to answer, which does not happen often." She opened the folder. 8 months ago, I nominated him for the Hargrove Educational Foundation Scholarship, $8,000 renewable annually through high school. It covers supplies, enrichment programs, and a summer academic camp at SMU. She slid a page across the table. The nomination form, Leo's name at the top, Patricia's signature at the bottom. He was the strongest candidate in the applicant pool. I was certain he would receive it. "But he didn't," I said. "He was removed from the finalist list 6 weeks before the award was announced." Patricia's jaw tightened. "The official reason given was residential instability. His address of record had been flagged in the Foundation screening system due to credit-related alerts associated with the household. She looked at me directly. What that means in plain language is that the fraudulent debt attached to Clara's social security number contaminated Leo's eligibility through the household financial profile. A 10-year-old boy was disqualified from a scholarship because of debt his grandmother created in his mother's name without either of them knowing. My hands were flat on the table. I kept them there. "There is something else?" Patricia said. Her voice dropped slightly. Evelyn Calloway was a contributing donor to the Hargrove Foundation. As a donor above a certain threshold, she held a seat on the Scholarship Review Committee. She paused, letting that land. I cannot prove she specifically identified Leo's application and acted against it. But I was present at the committee meeting where his file was discussed, and I can tell you that the residential instability flag was raised immediately and forcefully, and that the person who raised it did not need to be persuaded. The room felt very still. "Leo never cried," Patricia continued. Her voice had gone quieter now, carrying something careful in it. "When I told him the scholarship had been awarded to another student, he looked at his desk for a moment. Then he looked up at me and said, 'I told him of course he could.'" She pressed her lips together briefly. "He asked me if the library had the kind of math books that go past what we do in class. I said I would find some for him." She stopped. "I bought them myself. I did not tell him that." I looked down at the table for a moment. The surface of it was the kind of institutional gray-brown that furniture gets when it has been useful for a very long time without anyone noticing. I looked at it because I needed somewhere neutral to put my eyes while I absorbed what Patricia Vance had just told me. A 10-year-old boy, asking if he could study at the library on Saturdays because he had just lost an $8,000 scholarship that a woman had helped engineer his removal from using debt she had manufactured in his mother's name. And his response had been to ask about math books. "He will testify to what she observed at the committee meeting," Raymond said quietly from the chair beside me. He had been writing throughout steady and unhurried. As a committee member and educator, her account of how Leo's application was handled constitutes direct evidence of targeted harm. Combined with the financial documentation of the fraudulent debt that triggered the disqualification, this establishes a pattern of deliberate interference extending to a minor child. Patricia nodded. "I will say whatever needs to be said," she told Raymond. "Whatever helps Leo." She stood, shook our hands, and left the folder on the table. I listened to her footsteps disappear down the hallway, and then I sat in the quiet of the meeting room with Raymond and did not speak for a moment. Then Margaret Holt knocked at the open door. She was holding a small envelope, not the kind lawyers use, but the kind that gets sold in drugstore multi-packs, plain white, slightly bent at one corner, as though it had been carried in a pocket for a long time. Beside her stood a man I did not recognize, mid-40s, heavy-set, wearing a work jacket with the logo of a cleaning company on the breast pocket. He was holding his cap in both hands and turning it slowly, the gesture of someone who has come to do something that cost him something to decide. "And this is Dennis Park," Margaret said. "He came to the shelter this morning asking for you, specifically Mr. Calloway." Dennis Park looked at me with the careful, measured expression of a man choosing his words before he committed to them. "I cleaned the house on Birchwood Lane," he said, "about 14 months ago. The woman who hired me said she needed it cleared out." He stopped turning his cap. "When we were done, I found something in the back of the hall closet. A plain envelope had fallen behind the shelf. I opened it to see if there was an address." His jaw tightened slightly. It was a photograph. 3 people. A man, a woman, and a little girl. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced the envelope. The little girl was wearing a yellow jacket. I didn't know who they were, but I couldn't throw it away. He held the envelope out to me. I took it. I opened the flap and slid out the photograph. It was a print 4x6, slightly faded at the edges, the way photographs fade when they have been handled many times over many years. Eleanor stood on the left, laughing at something outside the frame. I stood on the right, younger by at least 20 years, my arm around Eleanor's shoulder. Between us, 3 years old, wearing the yellow jacket Eleanor had bought her, the Christmas before she could properly walk in a straight line, was Clara. I had not seen a photograph of the 3 of us together in 14 years. My throat closed so completely that I could not have produced a word if my life had required it. I sat with the photograph in both hands and felt Eleanor's laugh and Clara's yellow jacket and my own younger face looking back at me from a time before any of this had happened, from a time when the worst thing I could have imagined was nothing close to what had actually occurred. Dennis Park was watching me with quiet, respectful eyes. I kept it because it seemed like it mattered to somebody, he said simply. It does, I managed. Thank you. That evening I brought the photograph to Clara's room. I did not explain it. I simply placed it on the table in front of her and stepped back. Leo looked up from the floor where he was lying on his stomach, drawing something with a blue marker. Clara looked at the photograph. She went completely still. Then she picked it up with both hands and pressed it against her chest and held it there. Eyes closed, breathing in the way you breathe when something you believed was gone, forever, turns out to have been waiting in a hall closet 14 months for someone decent enough to pick it up. Leo got to his feet. He looked at me over his mother's bowed head. "Grandpa," he said. He reached for his backpack, which was on the chair beside the door where it always was, and pulled out a phone. Old model screen cracked across the lower right corner. The kind of device that had lived a very hard life at the bottom of a 10-year-old's bag. "There's something I've been keeping. I didn't know who to give it to." He held it out to me. "I think it's time." Leo held the phone out with both hands. It was an older model 2 generations behind at least the kind of device that gets passed down when a newer one arrives, kept alive by habit and the particular stubbornness of children who grow attached to things. The screen was cracked across the lower right corner in a spiderweb pattern that had clearly been there long enough to become unremarkable. The case was gone. The charging port showed the wear of a cable inserted and removed hundreds of times. I took it from him carefully, as though it were something fragile, though it clearly was not. It had survived whatever a 10-year-old's backpack could do to it for the better part of a year. "Tell me about this," I said. Leo sat down on the edge of the bed. He folded his hands in his lap with the deliberate composure of a child who has rehearsed what he is about to say and wants to get it right. "About a year ago," he said, "Grandma Evelyn came to the house, the old house on Birchwood Lane. She brought a woman I didn't know. They went into the kitchen and closed the door." He paused. "I was doing homework at the table in the hallway right outside. My jacket was on the hook by the door. This phone was in the jacket pocket." He looked at the device in my hands. The voice recorder app was already open. I must have hit it by accident when I put the phone in the pocket earlier. "You didn't know it was recording," I said. "Not until later, when I listened back." He looked at me steadily. "I didn't understand everything they said, but I understood enough to know it was bad." His chin moved slightly, not quite a tremble, but the motion of a jaw working against something. "I didn't know who to give it to. Mom was already dealing with so much. I didn't want to make it worse, so I kept it." He kept it for a year, a 10-year-old boy carrying a cracked phone in his backpack for 12 months because he did not know who to hand it to and did not want to add to his mother's weight. "Leo," I said, "you did exactly right." He looked at me with those serious dark eyes. "Is it going to help?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I believe it is." I plugged the charging cable from the nightstand into the phone and waited for the screen to stabilize. Clara sat on the edge of the bed beside Leo, one hand resting on his knee. She had not spoken since Leo produced the device, but her face was doing something complicated, hope and dread, moving through it in alternating waves, the expression of a person who wants very badly for something to be true and has learned to be careful about wanting things. I navigated to the audio file. The timestamp read 11 minutes and 23 seconds. I pressed play. The audio was imperfect, muffled in the way that recorded sound is muffled when a phone is inside a fabric pocket, the ambient noise of a kitchen underneath it, the occasional clink of something being set on a counter. But the voices were clear enough. Evelyn's voice came first, lower than I remembered it in ordinary conversation, stripped of the warmth she performed when she believed someone was listening who mattered. "The transfer needs to happen before the end of the month. Julian already has the paperwork prepared." Then a second voice, older, harder, a woman I did not immediately recognize but would later confirm, was Beatrice Miller. "And if she contests it, she won't. She doesn't know what she's looking for. She thinks the bank is handling it." A pause, the sound of liquid being poured. Then Evelyn again. "Robert sends every month without checking. He trusts me completely. Everything routes through the secondary account. Clara never sees a cent." Clara made a sound beside me, small, involuntary. She pressed her hand over her mouth. The recording continued. Evelyn and Beatrice discussing timing, discussing a document Julian had prepared, referencing a notary whose name was partially obscured by the sound of a cabinet being opened. Then Beatrice and the arrangement with Thomas ongoing. As long as he cooperates and keeps his mouth shut, the payments continue through the contracting work. Gerald understands what's expected. Then Evelyn, in the tone of someone describing a machine that is functioning exactly as designed. She has no one to turn to. Her father is gone. The house will be transferred before she understands what has happened. By the time she figures out any of it, there will be nothing left to figure out. The recording ended. The room held its breath. I set the phone down on the nightstand very carefully. My hands were shaking not slightly, but visibly the way hands shake when the body is processing something it cannot contain through ordinary channels. 11 minutes and 23 seconds of Evelyn's voice in her own words, describing every element of what she had done to my family while she believed no one was listening. Clara had both arms wrapped around herself. Her face was pale and very still, her eyes fixed on the phone as though it were something she needed to keep in her sight. Leo watched both of us. He had the expression of a child who has been carrying a heavy thing and has finally put it down, and is not yet sure what to do with the absence of the weight. I picked up my phone and called Raymond. He answered on the first ring. "Come to the hotel," I said. "Right now, and bring your recorder." Raymond arrived in 20 minutes. He settled into the chair Leo had vacated, placed his own phone face up on the nightstand beside Leo's cracked device, and listened to the full 11 minutes and 23 seconds without moving a single muscle. Clara sat beside me on the bed. Leo had positioned himself at the small table by the window with a granola bar from the minibar, and his homework giving us the space that adults needed with the quiet, instinctive tact of a child who had spent years reading rooms and adjusting himself accordingly. When the recording ended, Raymond sat forward. "I need to be direct with you about the legal standing of this recording," he said. He looked at Leo first, then at me. "Texas is a one-party consent state. Under the Texas wiretapping statute, a recording is legal if at least one party to the conversation consents to being recorded. However, Leo was not a party to the conversation between Evelyn and Beatrice Miller. He was a minor who recorded them accidentally without their knowledge and without being part of their discussion. That makes this a third-party recording." He paused. "It cannot be introduced as standalone evidence in a criminal trial," he said. He held up one finger before I could respond. "But it can be used in civil proceedings, and more importantly," he looked at Leo directly, "it tells us exactly where to look, every name mentioned, every account referenced, every action described. We now know precisely what we are searching for, and precisely where the evidence will be. This recording does not convict her by itself. It builds the road that leads to everything that does." Clara let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for a year. Leo looked up from his homework. He had been listening. Of course he had been listening. "So it helps," he said. Raymond looked at my grandson across the hotel room, this 10-year-old boy who had carried a cracked phone in his backpack for 12 months, because he understood, without being told, that what he had heard mattered. "Son," Raymond said, "it changes everything." Leo considered this. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to his worksheet with the satisfied expression of someone who has completed a task he set himself a long time ago. I looked at Clara. She was already looking at me. Raymond stood and reached for his coat. "There is one more thing Marcus flagged this afternoon," he said. "He found the cemetery." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Section D," Raymond said quietly. "Riverside Memorial. Arthur, Clara, and Leo should come with you. Marcus says you need to see it together." We went the following afternoon. Clara said she needed to see it herself. Leo said he was coming too, in the tone he used when a decision had already been made and adults were simply being informed. I did not argue with either of them. Some things need to be witnessed together, and I already knew this was one of them. Riverside Memorial was 20 minutes east of downtown Dallas. The older sections dense with mature oaks headstones, ranging from plain granite slabs to carved monuments. The grass trimmed with the quiet care of a place that understood it was holding something people could not get back. The October light fell through the canopy in long, pale shafts, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they are being examined. Section D was 20 feet off the main path. Leo found it first. He stopped walking, stood completely still, then turned back to look at me with an expression that asked a question he did not have words for yet. I walked forward. Dark granite, high polish. An expensive stone, the kind that requires planning a specific conversation with a funeral home, a deliberate choice about weight and dimension and inscription. Arthur James Calloway, beloved husband, 1957-2021. He gave everything he had. I read it 3 times. The air left my body so completely that I reached sideways and caught the nearest oak tree with my palm, the bark solid and rough and real in a way that almost nothing else felt real in that moment. She had given me an epitaph. She had stood in a funeral home office and chosen those words and had them carved into stone, and then brought my daughter here to grieve a man who was eating breakfast in Singapore. Dad. Clara's voice came from behind me, smaller and rawer than any voice she had used since I found her under that overpass. I brought Leo here after the service. He was 6 years old. He picked yellow flowers from the shelter yard and put them on it himself. Leo stood at the foot of the stone and looked at it with the steady gaze of a child taking stock of something that had cost him more than he knew how to calculate. I used to talk to it, he said quietly. I told you about school. I told you about the Lego Mom had to sell. He stopped. I thought maybe you could hear me. I crossed the distance between us and crouched down and put both hands on his thin shoulders. I would have given anything to hear you, I said. Do you understand me anything? His composure broke not loudly because Leo did almost nothing loudly, but the tears came fast and without warning, and he grabbed my coat with both fists and pressed his face against my shoulder and shook with a year's worth of talking to a stone that could not answer. I held him. Clara stood with both hands flat against her chest, just set in that stubborn Eleanor angle, tears running freely. But her eyes were present, no longer carrying the look of a person who believes she is completely alone. After a while, Leo straightened. He wiped his face on his jacket sleeve and looked at the headstone one final time. I'm glad you're not dead, Grandpa, he said. I laughed, short, broken, completely genuine. So am I, Bud, I said. So am I. Clara had already photographed everything stone plot marker section sign with the methodical efficiency of a woman who had learned that documentation was the only currency that held its value. My phone buzzed as I raised mine. Raymond Victor Salinas came through. Visitor log shows Evelyn at the cemetery office March 14, 2021. Signed in as surviving spouse. Plot purchased that day. 4 months before she called Clara with the notification she bought the grave before she made the call. 4 months? She had stood in that office, filed the forged death certificate as a legal instrument to purchase this plot, chosen this stone, dictated those 4 lines he gave everything he had, and then gone home and waited 4 months before making the phone call that would send my daughter here with yellow flowers. Under federal law, using a forged government document to complete a financial transaction constitutes a separate criminal offense from the forgery itself. Raymond had already flagged it. One more count, one more piece of a structure that had been built to outlast any single attempt to dismantle it. I put my phone away and looked at the stone one final time. It was granite and a lie. We were still here. On the drive back, my phone rang. Unknown number. Evelyn's voice came through steady and unhurried. Arthur, I think we should settle this quietly, for the sake of the family. I looked out the window at the Dallas skyline, coming on tower by tower, in the October dusk, cold and indifferent and beautiful. I'll see you in court, I said. Then I ended the call. My hand went to it before I finished deciding. I had worn it to Eleanor's funeral. Some days require you to carry the weight of the people you have lost into the rooms where you are fighting for the people still here. Clara saw it in the lobby and stopped walking. That's the suit from Mom's funeral, she said. I know, I said. She reached out and straightened my collar with 2 careful fingers, the way Eleanor used to do, and said nothing further. It was the most complete sentence she could have offered. In the car, Leo looked out the window at the ordinary Dallas morning coffee shops opening, people walking fast against the November chill with the intensity of a child trying to memorize what ordinary looks like before it changes. Will I have to say anything? He asked. No, Bud, Raymond said. You already said everything that mattered when you handed your grandfather that phone. Leo nodded once and turned back to the window. Clara took his hand. He let her, which meant he needed it. Margaret Holt was outside the shelter when we passed. She looked at me directly. You bring her home? She said. Yes, ma'am, I said. In the corridor outside the hearing room, Clara stopped. What if she has one more thing, one more lie we haven't found? Then Raymond handles it. I held her cold hands. You only have to be exactly who you are today. Her chin trembled once, then it stopped. Okay, she said. Okay, Leo confirmed with the absolute authority of someone who had decided his input was necessary. Evelyn arrived at 8:55, slate gray blazer, leather portfolio, the composed pace of a woman who believed she still controlled the story. She had walked into the end of it. The gavel came down. Before I reveal the final confrontation at the courtroom, please comment "Justice" right now, so I know you are still here with me. And please note, the upcoming events contain some fictional elements and might not fully reflect factual events. If you prefer not to listen further, you are welcome to turn off the video right here. Gerald Fitch opened with misunderstandings and good faith and the word unfortunate. He used it 4 times. He did not use the word fraud once. Raymond let him finish. Then Raymond buttoned his jacket and placed the first folder on the table and began. He did not make a speech. He placed documents down, one at a time, wire transfer records, structured payments to Beatrice Miller, corporate filings, tracing Thomas's contracts back to Evelyn's property management firm, and he explained each one in language so precise that Fitch's 2 objections died the moment the hearing officer looked at the page. Thomas told the truth without decoration. Julian Pierce told the same truth with shaking hands. Then Raymond played Exhibit 23. 11 minutes and 23 seconds of Evelyn's own voice filled the room. Clara never sees a cent. By the time she figures out any of it, there will be nothing left to figure out. Clara's hand found mine under the table. I held on. Sandra Whitmore took the stand after lunch. 63 years old, silver-haired, 22 years of waiting behind her eyes. I am here because what she did to my family, she did to this family too, and because 22 years is long enough to wait. Then Raymond stood. The people call one final witness, Arthur James Calloway. I stood up. I straightened the charcoal jacket. I walked through the rail. I took the stand. I looked at Evelyn. Her composure did not shatter. It emptied. Every constructed layer drained simultaneously, leaving something underneath that was flat and stripped, and for the first time, completely unguarded. "Please state your name for the record," Raymond said. "Arthur James Calloway." I said, "The man whose death certificate you are holding was forged. I did not die. I am alive, and I have been sitting in that gallery for 6 hours." The room erupted, and I began to speak. Raymond called on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the hearing. "She entered a plea," he said. "All counts, wire fraud, forgery, identity theft, false government document. Sentencing is scheduled for February." A pause. "The civil judgment is entered, Arthur. The house on Birchwood Lane is restored to Clara's name. The fraudulent debt, all $342,000, is void, and the civil recovery judgment of $1.2 million stands in Clara's favor." I sat at the hotel desk and looked out the window at December Dallas for a long moment. "Thank you," I said, "for all of it." "Go get your daughter," Raymond said, "and go home." I stopped at the shelter first. Margaret Holt was at her desk when I knocked. She looked up and read my face before I said a word. She stood and extended her hand, and I shook it and held it for a moment longer than a handshake requires because some debts do not have adequate currency. "She's ready," Margaret said simply. Raymond met us on Birchwood Lane at noon. He was standing at the front door with a single key on a plain ring, and he handed it to Clara without ceremony, because ceremony was not what the moment needed. Clara held the key in her palm. Leo was already at the door, backpack on, shifting his weight from foot to foot, with the barely contained energy of a boy who had been patient for a very long time and had reached the absolute outer boundary of it. "Finally," he said. Clara laughed. Then she looked at me. "Together," she said. "Together," I said. She put the key in the lock. It turned with a clean, solid click, the sound of something that had been closed far too long, opening exactly the way it was supposed to. The door swung inward. Leo went first. His footsteps rang on the hardwood floor, quick and purposeful, moving from room to room, with the energy of a child reclaiming something that had always belonged to him. We heard him in the kitchen, then the hallway, then the sound of a window being pushed open somewhere at the back of the house, because Leo had always needed air. Clara stood in the middle of the empty living room and did not move for a long time. I stood beside her and did not rush her. The afternoon light came through the front windows, the way light comes through windows in houses that have been waiting, pale and still and very patient. Dust moved in it, The floors were bare. The walls held the faint rectangular shadows of pictures that had once hung there and been taken down. But the bones of the place were the same. The ceiling height, the particular way the light fell across the floor in the late afternoon. The oak tree in the front yard visible through the window, older now, its roots beginning to push up the edge of the front walk the way Eleanor had always said they eventually would. Clara reached out and touched the wall beside her with her fingertips. Just touched it. The way you confirm something real. Then she turned to me. "Dad," she said. Her voice was quiet and completely steady. "We're home." I looked at my daughter standing in the house I had bought, so she would always have somewhere safe in the afternoon light of a December day in Dallas, with the sound of her son's footsteps moving freely through every room. "Yes," I said, "we are. They say God gives every man exactly what he can carry. I am not sure I believed that for a long time. But standing in that living room on Birchwood Lane, watching Clara touch the wall and Leo's footsteps fill every room, I understood it for the first time. This is a family story about what happens when trust is given to the wrong person. And I was wrong not once but for 10 years. I chose distance over presence. I chose the assumption of safety over the work of staying close. That choice left my daughter alone in the dark with a 10-year-old boy and 47 letters she wrote to a dead man. So let me say this plainly from one father to anyone listening: don't be like me. Don't let the years of absence pile up until your family story becomes a story of survival instead of love. Stay. Show up. Verify the things that matter. This family betrayal did not begin with Evelyn. It began with a father who stopped paying attention. Family betrayal finds its way through the gaps we leave open. And family betrayal always costs more than we ever imagined it would. If this family story moves something in, you share it. Leave a comment below. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. From the bottom of this old heart, thank you for staying until the very last word. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements built entirely for reflection and to carry a message worth hearing. If that is not for you, step away, find what feeds your soul, and take good care of yourself.